All right, today we are diving into one of the most famous and maybe one of the most misunderstood prophecies in the entire Bible. It's a message that was born in a moment of absolute political crisis, given to a king who was completely terrified. This is a story about a test of faith, and honestly, the consequences just ripple across centuries. Let's get right into Isaiah chapter 7, starting at verse 10. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the king's moment of truth to really get what's at stake here. Then we get to this incredible offer that he just flat out refuses. That, of course, leads us to the famous Emmanuel prophecy and what that sign meant right then and there. And finally, we'll explore this fascinating idea of a single prophecy that seems to play out on two totally different timelines.
Okay, so let's set the stage. To really get this prophecy, you have to understand the pressure cooker of a situation that King Ahaz of Judah was in. It was bad. We're talking around the year 736 BC. Two of the neighboring kings have teamed up, and they have one goal: take Jerusalem and kick King Ahaz off the throne. The scripture says the hearts of the king and his people shook as the trees of the forest are shaken with the wind. I mean, can you picture that? They weren't just nervous, they were absolutely terrified. And it's right into the swirling panic that God decides to step in. Verse 10 kicks it off. Moreover, the Lord spake again unto Ahaz. Now, this is a huge deal. It's a direct intervention for a king who, crippled by fear, is about to make a terrible, terrible mistake, putting his trust in the foreign superpower of Assyria instead of in God.
So what God does next is, well, it's pretty incredible. He basically makes Ahaz an offer he can't refuse. But let's see how the king actually responds to this blank check of divine help. In verse 11, God essentially hands Ahaz a blank check. He says, ask for a sign. Ask it either in the depths or in the heights above. He's saying, look, name your miracle. Anything you can imagine, from the bottom of the sea to the highest heaven, and I will do it, just to prove to you that I've got your back. The scale of this offer is just staggering. So what does Ahaz do? As we see in verse 12, he turns it down. And on the surface, his reply sounds so holy, doesn't it? I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. He's even quoting scripture, trying to sound super pious. But is he really? Yeah, this is not humility. Not even close. The source material puts it so well, saying the wicked king Ahaz clutches his moral pearls to avoid having to trust God. This is just faithlessness disguised as piety. You see, the thing is, Ahaz has already made up his mind. He's going to make a political deal with Assyria. He doesn't want a sign from God, because if he gets one, he'd be obligated to trust God's plan instead of his own. But Ahaz's refusal doesn't stop God. Not at all. In fact, it kind of provokes one of the most important prophecies ever given. Since the king won't ask for a sign, God's just going to provide one himself. You can almost feel the prophet Isaiah's frustration boiling over in verse 13. He stops talking just to Ahaz and turns to the entire royal family, the house of David. And he says, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will you weary my God also? He's basically saying, seriously? Isn't it enough that you exhaust everyone's patience? Now you're going to exhaust God's patience too with this stubborn unbelief? And then, here it is, verse 14. This is the sign. It's a direct answer to Ahaz's lack of faith. The Lord himself shall give you a sign. God is taking over. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. I mean, these words would echo for the next 700 years and way, way beyond. So what in the world does this name Emmanuel mean? Well, the name itself is a huge part of the sign, Emmanuel. And as the New Testament explains in Matthew chapter 1, it literally means God with us. It's a direct, powerful promise of God's presence and his deliverance right in the middle of their crisis. Okay, so this is a beautiful promise for sure, but for King Ahaz, it had to be more than just poetry. It had to be a real, tangible, time-sensitive sign that he could actually see happen. So let's look at verses 15 and 16 to see how this was supposed to play out for him. So the prophecy actually has its own timeline built right in. Verse 16 lays it out. A young woman will conceive and have a son. And before that little boy is old enough to refuse the evil and choose the good, so we're talking roughly age 8 to 12, the land of those two enemy kings that Ahaz is so scared of will be forsaken. The sign is basically a ticking clock. Within about a decade, his problem will be completely gone. But wait, what about verse 15? Butter and honey shall he eat. That sounds good, right? Like a sign of prosperity? But in this context, it's the exact opposite.
It actually points to a land where the farms have been destroyed by invasion. People are reduced to just eating dairy from whatever animals are left and gathering wild honey. It's a subtle warning of the hardship that's coming when the Assyrians, the very people Ahaz is trusting, come and tear through the land.
And guess what? History totally backs this up. Within just a few years, in 732 BC, King Rezin of Syria was killed by the Assyrians. Right after that, King Pekah of Israel was assassinated. And by 722 BC, well within the prophecy's timeline, both of those kingdoms were history. The immediate threat to Ahaz was gone, just like the sign predicted. So, the sign worked for Ahaz. Problem solved, right? But as we all know, that is not the end of the story, not by a long shot. And this leads us to our final section, the incredible dual nature of this prophecy.
This is what scholars often call a dual fulfillment or a dual prophecy. And the idea is that it's one single prophetic sign, but it has two targets. An immediate fulfillment that served as a sign for the people right there and then, and a distant, ultimate fulfillment that it was always pointing towards.
So here's how it breaks down. The immediate fulfillment involved a young woman, at that time, maybe Isaiah's wife, we don't know for sure, having a son. And that child's timeline would prove the prophecy was true for Ahaz. But that event was really a foreshadowing of the ultimate fulfillment, a young woman, Mary, miraculously conceiving as a virgin and bringing forth the ultimate Emmanuel, Jesus Christ, who is literally God with us. And of course, the writer of Matthew's Gospel makes this connection absolutely explicit. He quotes Isaiah 7:14 word for word and applies it directly to the birth of Jesus. This just shows that from the very beginning of Christianity, this prophecy was understood to have its final, most complete fulfillment in the Messiah.
So we're left with this incredible thing. A sign that was given to a faithless king way back in the 8th century BC becomes a cornerstone of faith for billions of people 2,000 years later. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. How does digging into a prophecy's original historical context, its first meaning, actually enrich and deepen our understanding of its ultimate fulfillment?